All right. The next game we're going to cover is Adventure, which was nominated by @neon_henchman on Twitter. It was developed by Atari. Really, it was developed by a guy named Warren Robinette for Atari and published by Atari for the Atari 2600. I don't have a release date, but I believe it's 1979? Yeah, okay, yeah, it is. Yeah, 1979. Seems like possibly 1980, but I really think it was 1979.
If you really want to split hairs on this, there's really nothing around that time that's like it. So whatever. It's like it's adventure. It is in the name. It is literally the first adventure in games, basically. It's the
before people had to think about search and like what would actually aggregate well. I'm sorry, our dog is going crazy. Launchpad.
Here, boy.
Your dog is named Launchpad? Is your dog named after Launchpad McQuack?
Launchpad.
Yeah.
Here, boy.
Oh.
No adventures for you. He doesn't like the word podcast. He wants us to keep playing with him right now.
Hey, Mr. McD.
Will D, Mr. McDo.
But that's cool, because he can listen to us talk about adventure, which
which we're going to do whether we want to or... No, I love Adventure. This game is it's pretty much the only game that you can say this is clearly a precursor to The Legend of Zelda. In a way, it was Warren Robinette's idea was I'm going to make a game that is basically Zork, but do it with graphics and no text. And he succeeds. And he does
excluding the text in the manual, which tells you what some of the more complex things operate.
That's true. But it's not describing the rooms to you. It's the exact opposite of Zork in the sense that it visually represents everything it is.
Yes. There's
at no point do you may not know what that thing is that looks like two brackets next to each other. But that's a bridge. But it doesn't really matter. Like you figure it out. It's got a game world. It's got like an overworld type map type thing. It's got different castles you can go into. It's got everybody I think knows at this point, it's got the first known Easter egg in video game history, where you could hit like a very specific pixel in a very specific castle and find designed by Warren Robinette in a special room, and because Atari did not credit its developers at that time.
And then they went bankrupt in the future. What a coincidence.
Yeah, believe it or not, the people who made these games did not take kindly to being treated like garbage, and they left and formed another company called Activision that made really great games and gave credit to their designers and made a ton of money.
That's weird.
Today. It's strange.
So strange. I don't understand it. But so this game, you play as a cube or a block or a square or a dot, and that's you.
You're a dot, yeah.
Yeah, it's your representation is the dot. And you get to fight like duck dinosaur dragon things. I love them. They're so cute.
Yeah, there's the dragon.
And they actually you can see inside their stomach, so it's the first Vor game ever made.
They eat you. You're in there. Yeah, that's right. The dot is inside the belly.
What about Pac-Man?
Well, you can eat people, but
you don't get eaten.
It's very specific.
Sorry, quite okay.
Cool.
All right,
now you're an expert.
Part of the Vor fantasy, which is to be cognizant and sentient while inside somebody's digestive tract.
And it's great that actually is an adventure. But it's I love their design. It's like, I don't know if he just didn't think he could make a dragon, but they're just so cute. They're like weird duck-billed dragons.
Quetzalcoatl, like bird dragon vibe that I appreciated.
It was just like a duck to me.
Everything looks like a duck to you,
especially this dragon here.
Duck seahorse, right?
Yeah. And they chase you through the levels. They follow you.
They really do.
I guess like in terms of the simplicity of this game, which of course it has to be simple for the 2600, but I had not played this game before this podcast, and I didn't have a manual or anything. I was just like, all right, I'm just gonna jump in, and it was kind of complicated. Like it's not super complicated, but I had no idea of what to do or even how to win the game. But I still managed to do it, within like the first 15 minutes on my first.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah.
It is like in gameplay and aesthetic and sound, it is a complete distillation of a video game. It could not be simpler than this, but still be a coherent game with as many levels of challenge and replayability.
Well, I can only assume if you were playing this in 1979-ish on your home television, this would have you'd just be like, my God! Like
your mind would have split open like a baked potato. It was here. I mean, this is a time at what the things that Atari game designers were doing at this time in the late 70s what was basically like this is the perfect time period for game development in a sense, because it's right when they're really starting to understand the hardware, but they know nothing about game design because game design doesn't really exist as a concept. And so they have no clue what they can and can't do, and they just try it. And that's where you get games like Star Raiders and Haunted House and Adventure and stuff like that, where it's like, who would ever think to do this? And if they stop to think like, oh, I can't do that. No, we can't do that.
No, of course you can just pick up the sword and then you just kind of jam it into the dragons, like
right.
And
it looks like an arrow, and it really confused me because I kept thinking, oh, it's like a spear or an arrow, and therefore I should be grabbing it by the. But it doesn't really matter. You can grab it from any direction.
No, as long as they touch it before they touch you, it's all good.
According to William Robinette, I was reading this really cool interview in US Gamer that came out last year, and he was saying that his boss has told him that this game can't be made because, he was basing it off of Colossal Cave, which takes up about 100K, and they needed Adventure to only be 2 to 4K to be able to run on,
yeah.
And it's just like, oh, okay, and that's why he just didn't tell anybody that he was making this game. And then finally just showed it to a bunch of people and was like, can I keep making this? Okay, cool.
Right. Yeah. And the same thing is true of Star Raiders, by the way. It was a game that was made by a guy named Doug Smith, and he did it in his spare time. He was like the sound chip designer for the, was it the sound chip or the input-output something or other for the Atari 8-bit computers. And he made Star Raiders, which is an even more complicated and impressive game. And did it in his spare time. And he talks about playing Adventure in its early builds and being blown away by that at the same time. It's really fascinating story to read about these guys. And this is the same time, by the way, when like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak are like screwing around with the breakout board and stuff like that. It's like, this is video games ground zero, The crazy thing about Adventure, before we get on to ranking, because it's hard to really talk too much about this game because it is very, very simple. And in a lot of ways, you're better off just playing it rather than listening to people talk about it. Because
probably read the manual before you play it, just because it gives you a little bit of hints like how to use the bridge, because the bridge is a very strange and impressive addition. Yeah.
So every stage in the game or every screen in the game is perfectly symmetrical because that's the way the Atari was designed to draw its play field, because it was basically designed to play combat and Pong, so that you could have totally symmetrical play fields, and that was fine. And so that's the way they did it. And it's got, and they all kind of interconnect. It's like a big maze, and there's different items. There's There's the bridge, there's the sword, there's the key.
And there's the magnet in case you accidentally put your key in a wall, so you can use the magnet to suck it up. Yeah, you got the
magnet, which is a great example of like, well, there's a bug here, but rather than fixing the bug, we're just going to make another item that...
I'd say he couldn't, like, in the amount of space, he probably couldn't fix the bug, so his only choice was to make an item.
I'm not suggesting it's laziness. I mean, it's just an example of...
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the magnet because eventually I got to the point where I was carrying, like, the chalice, one of the keys, and the magnet, and I just took it with me through all of the rooms.
Right, and there's the chalice. Yeah.
We're going on an adventure, boys.
And the really weird thing is that you've got two enemies, I think. You've got the dragon, which we've already talked about, who just kind of wanders around.
There's 3 dragons, and they all have individual names, but I don't remember them. But
it doesn't matter. And there's the bat, Krang, which is a very interesting enemy.
And an asshole.
Yeah, the bat can pick you up and take you other places, I think.
No, the bat, he steals items, yeah. And in order to use those items, you have to grab the bat. And then you have to carry the bat around, who now has the item. And the bat can get out of your grasp occasionally. And you're like, no, come back with my sword, you asshole! And then the dragon eats you.
But the bat is like an agent of chaos in this game. And it's exactly the thing that the game needed, because... how can you have an adventure game and add value to it once you've solved the adventure, right? Introduce random elements.
Incredibly, the game's third difficulty setting, or third switch setting, is a randomized mode that places the items randomly, I believe it is. So it's incredible in that regard.
And you've got the bridge item, which you mentioned, but we didn't really discuss how it works. It's a huge item, and what you use it for is basically you drag it with you, and when you place it anywhere on the map, it cuts a path through obstacles, right?
Yeah, it lets you, as long as the kind of the exit and entrance on the bridge are in walkable terrain, you can walk across the bridge to get through walls in the labyrinth and mazes and stuff.
It's one of those innovations, like how in Earthbound, once you're a high enough level, characters will just run away from you. like, it's one of those innovations in video games that I'm so upset hasn't been carried over. Like, I could just imagine myself, even in, like, something simple like the Pokemon games for the Game Boy Color, just like, man, I would love to skip this fucking dark cave right now. Like, I've been in here a million times. I don't need to talk to another Zubat. Like, I wish I had the just skip over this dumb...
I know I know in the grand scheme of things, I need to go over one square on the game, but I have to go through this cave. If I just use the bridge...
I believe if you watch the speed runs of the original Game Boy Pokemon games, there's a glitch that they all use that actually allows you to just do exactly that, walk through walls. And it makes the game a lot shorter. So check that out, kids, if you haven't seen that. It's pretty interesting.
I need to get good, I guess.
But that's adventure, I think, more or less.
Yeah, we got to rank it. This is a weird one because it is one of those games.
It comes down to this question, like, you know, when you rank these games, there's maybe kind of two things to consider, like its legacy. What did it, you know, how important is this game? And then how good is it still? And I think it's like adventure is undeniably one of the most important games that has ever been made. But really, when you really think about it, would you, like, you know, recommend this game to like your nephew or something like that? Is it still really that good?
If they ported it to iOS, like,
it was one of the first games ported to iOS, by the way.
Oh, it was?
Wow. Yeah, you could play it in 2008, I think, like right when the App Store opened up. You could play Adventure.
I know. We'll get that right now.
And in fact, that's the first time I finished the game was that way. But Grace can answer this question because she played it all the way through, beating it kind of by accident. Sounds like. Was it fun?
I thought it was really fun, but I am in a weird position of I get super jazzed about video game history and the whole the wild, you know, which of course all the listeners of this podcast would too, but the whole Wild West era of games where people were just figuring it out. And so that's something that I find really energizing and kind of like persuaded me to go back through it. In terms of, does it hold up? I mean, I played it, like, I got through it the first time like under 20 minutes, like probably more like 12.
Yeah.
So it's like there is that, and I'm not a particularly like amazing video game player or anything. So like I feel but I feel like my experience would, you know, I don't know. It is hard. I do wish we had like a separate.
Yeah, I mean, like in a way, saying, oh, you can beat it in 20 minutes even without knowing what you're doing is, you could look at that as a knock against it, or you could look at that as a huge asset because it is a very simple game and you can finish it quickly, but that in a way there's like kind of no excuse not to play it.
Yeah. Because
it's super important. It influenced a lot of things. Now, sure, any number of games would have done this eventually, you know, but that's not the point. The point is somebody came up with a way to do it on literally the most primitive hardware imaginable. I mean, it's like you couldn't have picked a weirder platform to develop a action adventure game for than the 2600, especially in the 70s before all the tricks had been figured out. And you can finish it pretty quickly, and it is fun, I think. I had a lot of fun playing it in, you know, the late aughts. Playing it, not for the first time, but for the first time playing it seriously as somebody who sat down and finished it. It was fun, and it doesn't take long to play, and I think most people, if they give it a chance, will enjoy it. It's rudimentary and fun in a way that a lot of the best early Atari games are. I'm talking about stuff like Combat and Warlords and, you know, Haunted House and Pitfall. So these are very simple games, but there's something elemental and fun about it that people will still get a kick out of. Like, I've got one of those plug and play Atari consoles, you know. I think it's the Flashback 2 or something like that. It's like the NES Classic Edition, but 10 years ago. You plug that into a TV and you sit down with a couple of joysticks and give it to some kids and play some of these early games, and they'll get into it pretty fast. I think Adventure might take a little bit more effort on their part.
Well, the problem with Adventure is, unlike some of the other Elemental games, which I'll use like Space Invaders or Pac-Man as an example, because it is more complicated, there's a bit more that can age it, especially since when you break down the actual game, it really is kind of just wandering around some mazes until you collect the items, and it is basically a key hunt, is essentially, if you went to like Doom and removed most of the monsters in a Doom level, and that's it, that's Adventure. You grab some keys and then you find the exit, which in this case is return the chalice to the castle. So I think of these games, it hasn't aged quite as well. It's still fun because it actually is fun, but it doesn't have quite the same degree of like.
Yeah, it's not as fun as say like combat is, right?
Like, yeah, I don't like if you threw this at say like we'll say like a 12 or 13-year-old, they'd just be like, why are you making me play this? I just want to play a video game.
Yeah, but they're idiots. I mean, like,
I'm just saying,
about, like, people who like games, not people who just like using racial slurs over voice chat.
No. Okay, let's say a theoretical 12-year-old who likes games and is interested. I think that they would play this game and immediately understand the historical significance from it, but would play it for 10 minutes and go, cool, I'm glad I know that exists, but I'm going to go check out other stuff.
Yeah, of course they check out other stuff. You got to move on to something. But I'm just saying, like, for what it is, if it's fun and you can stand to play it long enough to finish it, which, keep in mind, this is one of the first games that could be finished.
Yeah. That's
like graphical and not like a text adventure. I mean, that is pretty
It was
huge.
very confusing when I did finish it, because it was like, oh, it's not, Derek, it's not moving anymore. Like
none of that.
did the wrong.
There's no cart space left to say like the end. It's just you just have to get hard lock.
What kind of sound does it make? It's, boop, boop, boop. It's like, you're done. Okay, great. I would put this to rank this. I would put it. I'm going to say right below Kicks, and because I think Kicks is a similarly primitive game that has just that much more replay value. But it is.
Can I stir the pot?
Okay. All right.
I want this to go above Final Fantasy VII.
Just because you're a hater.
I
hate on Final Fantasy VII.
We've never had anyone complain about a Final Fantasy VII placement. We get complaints about almost all of our placements, but Final Fantasy VII apparently
Riven defender every other week who's like, "What do you guys do to Riven?
Yeah,
master that's Riven."
Riven. Yeah.
You think Final Fantasy VII would have defenders out the yin?
Yeah, no,
nobody comes up.
No, they don't.
Maybe the tide has finally turned on FF7. I've been holding that banner since the jump from the start of it.
As a JRPG, I mean, you can go back and listen to whatever episode that was. What episode was that? 14.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, listen to Top Games 14, and you'll hear me talk about it at length. And basically, I just point out that as a JRPG, it's good enough, and as from a character design, art design standpoint, it's incredible. It's really good, and it's unique in a way that it's really hard for games to really pull this off again. Like, I'd say, like, you have to go, like games like Borderlands do this now, where they're like, there's a style to it that kind of defines something or is impressive. The reason why, that's why I would put Adventure below it. But I can see what you're saying. Race, what do you say?
Derek has a real horse in this race.
Yeah,
I haven't played Dragon Saga recently enough and long enough to really feel comfortable putting it on the side.
I do think when it comes to this, we are really, really digging in our heels in terms of how influential and how important and how defining Adventure is. You'd kind of be insane to sort of be like, which game is better in like a really like physical way between like Adventure and say Panzer Dragoon Saga, because
when I really
this game Adventure barely has graphics. It's got a nice chicken duck bird dragon, but if
someone was asking me if they should play Final Fantasy VII or if they should play Adventure, I would tell them to play Adventure. Like if I really had to like, I would say that.
Well, I think that
either way, you're done with it after 20 minutes. Whereas with Final Fantasy VII, you're like, after
a long haul.
You haven't even started playing.
Save some time.
Yeah.
You are mortal. You have
like it's still like Mr. T like waving his stump arms at the camera at 20 minutes. Like nothing has happened. But there are images and stuff in Final Fantasy VII that I think will still resonate today. Like the art in the music and stuff like that. Like it's not the best Final Fantasy VII game. It's not the best JRPG. It's not. But there is a value to the style. That's all I'll say. But if everybody disagrees with me and says, as long as you don't put Adventure above Metroid, I'm okay.
No.
I'm just extremely struggling to really place Adventure.
I think really it needs to be either tough one. It needs to be on one side of Final Fantasy VII. I kind of feel like that's
okay. So Grace, what do you say? Above or below Final Fantasy VII?
I was just stirring the pot.
I'm okay with either or, though I would push. After I realized that I would recommend Adventure over Final Fantasy VII, I do. Oh, our dog's sniffing the mic. I do kind of want to put it above Final Fantasy VII.
Above
All right,
Final Fantasy.
I think that's it, because I can live with that, and that's 3. So it doesn't matter what Cal thinks. Democracy has spoken.